All right. 3, 2, 1. Why, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Evidence-Based Excellence Podcast. Yet again, with your host and friendly neighborhood far-right thug, Mr. George Cresswell. How are you doing today? Hope we're all doing well. Switched up the intro a little bit for this episode, and it will become clear why. It will become very, very clear why, but a lot of interest or a lot of focus on time in that intro. And that is because we're going to be talking about time today. Namely, is it better to train in the morning or in the evening for improved performance, improved adaptation, whatever the reason may be? Is there a right time, an optimal time to train? To hit the gym? Do you have to go in the morning in order to set everything up right and in order to achieve optimal performance? Or is it best to go and smash out your frustrations in the gym after a long, hard day at the office at peak time? Is there a superior time to go and hit the gym? That's what we're going to be talking about today. And we're going to start off, we're going to hit the ground running with it and get straight into what is known as the consensus meter. Now, I consulted a service known as Consensus for this episode, and I consulted if there's ever a research question which I want asked or I want to know the most relevant research the quickest, so they don't have to do a massive database search or go trawling through pages and pages of Google Scholar, articles. There's a service known as Consensus, which you can use online, and it uses AI, and it scans all of the databases or all of the most relevant research to your question for you and brings it to you. And if you then take out the premium service, for example, you can even get it to give you what's called a consensus meter. So if it's a yes or no question, it will give you a nice bar graph of whether the research, the most predominant research in the field, tends to show that yes, that whatever question you're asking, it's got to be a yes or no question for this. But is the answer to your question yes? Is it no? Based on what the results of all of the studies it's analyzed seem to suggest. And I put in the query for this question, or this episode rather: does the time of day affect the outcomes of strength training? Now, because I'm bad at thinking up questions, initially the question which I asked was something different. And it then gave me a suggestion being like, this isn't a yes or no question, George. You should really ask a yes or no question if you want a consensus meter to be shown. And then it suggested this question. So that's where that question came from. And I thought this was quite interesting. We're going to be breaking it down a little bit more now. But of the papers it analyzed, it only analyzed 9 in this one. And we're going to be going through a couple of them to get a little bit more detail about this topic today. On the very much so majority side of the spectrum, or on the question, it was yes. Time of day does, in fact, affect the outcomes of strength training and performance and all the rest of it. Very, very much so. 89% with only, I think it was one study maybe showing that no, it really doesn't. But we're going to be getting into a little bit about some of the studies which it brought to me today. We're going to be talking about 3 of them in particular. All of them can be found in the show notes below. All of the references can be found in the show notes below. We're going to start off with a meta-analysis, a systematic review and meta-analysis. Is the most recent one that I could find, published in 2019, so a little while ago. And the lead author is someone by the name of Grgic. I hope I'm pronouncing that name well, or correctly rather. I know that Brad Schoenfeld was also a author on this paper. As you know, Brad Schoenfeld, one of the very most well-known muscle hypertrophy and resistance training researchers in the field, out of his the Lehman Institute in the Bronx in New York. But this was a meta-analysis and systematic review published in 2019. I could only get the abstract because the full paper was locked behind the paywall. So we're just going off the abstract, but luckily they put a lot of good information within that abstract, which we can take away from it that haven't seen the full in-depth paper, which obviously if you're able to, I would advise you go and look at. So what was their sort of criteria? The title of the paper: The Effects of Time of Day Specific Resistance Training on Adaptations in Skeletal Muscle Hypertrophy and Muscle Strength. A systematic review and meta-analysis. It was published in Chronobiology International. And the studies which they included in this meta-analysis, it came to 11 overall, had to examine the effects of time of day specific training whilst equating other training variables, such as frequency and volume between the groups. The main outcomes, therefore, were muscular strength and muscle size. Okay, now, obviously, I don't know the individual methods which were used by the individual studies that were included in this meta-analysis. That's not the kind of thing that will be listed just in the abstract because it's far too much detail. Okay, but obviously, you can go and read that if you have access to the full paper. They use a random effects model for the meta-analysis, and the goal was to explore, or what they ended up exploring was A, the differences in strength expression between morning and evening performance at baseline. So they wanted to get a baseline look at what performance expression was like in the morning versus in the evening. Then you had B, the differences in strength within the groups training in the morning and the evening by using the post-intervention data from the morning and the evening strength assessments, so seeing how much their strength improved overall. And then finally, the overall differences between the effects of morning and evening resistance training. And then with any studies that assessed strength in the morning hours and the studies that assessed strength in the evening hours, they could then do a subgroup analysis, okay? The further meta-analysis then, or a further meta-analysis, was also conducted for studies assessing muscle hypertrophy. As I said, the total number of studies meeting the criteria, the methodological quality of which ranged in moderate to good, and they rated them via the Downs and Black scale. We spoke about that scale before. 11 moderate to good quality studies, so it's a fairly good base for a meta-analysis, to be fair. You know, typically you see evidence ranging in like the fair to good kind of region, so it's a nice little, this is sort of what you can hope for, really, because obviously different studies with different methodological arms, you know, they have different levels, or rather different methodological quality, rather. So you can't always get 100% high quality evidence. It'll always be a range of quality of evidence. Primary findings of which, now this is obviously the interesting part. At baseline, there was a significant difference in strength between the morning and evening hours, with greater strength observed in the evening hours. So that's good point number one, or primary finding number one. When they done their initial measurements, people were stronger in the evening versus the morning. Now, if you didn't do anything from there, that would probably lead you down the road of evening training is going to make you better. But let's get into more of the primary findings. Let's get into more of it. Resistance training in the morning hours may increase strength assessed in the morning to similar levels as the strength assessed in the evening. So that's an important point we're going to be coming back to as we look at the next study in particular, which is a randomized control trial and a literature review at the end. I want you to keep that point in mind. The resistance training in the morning may increase strength assessed in the morning to similar levels of that in the evening. Keep that point in mind about morning training. Training in the evening hours maintains the general difference in strength across the day with greater strength performance as a result. Kind of what we'd expect. Harkening back to point one in a way. Comparing the effects between groups training in the morning versus the evening hours, increases in strength were similar in both, regardless of time of day at which assessment is conducted. Okay, very important point. And increases in muscle size are similar irrespective of the time of day at which training is performed. That would make sense. That would make sense because, again, going back to what they made sure to account for at the start, and this is where it's always important when you're reading research and when you're critiquing it to take into account or to look at what they are trying to take into account, the researchers are trying to take into account, that are confounding variables, okay? That's why they made that point very clear at the start. Studies had to examine the effects of time of day specific training whilst equating other training variables, such as frequency and volume between the groups. Now we know, for example, let's take muscle hypertrophy, for example. We know that effective training volume is the primary stimulus for muscle hypertrophic processes. Increasing the training volume over time that is a close proximity to failure. It's what's going to predominantly increase muscle hypertrophy over time. That's what we mean by good training volume, okay? Because you can do a lot of volume, but if it's lacking the intensity component, it's not good quality volume, okay? It's just chunk volume at the end of the day. You're not getting anywhere near enough stimulus to promote significant growth that way. And that's why they had to equate it. Frequency, for example, if you're training more often, odds are you're getting more volume and you're getting more stimulus is in. Stimuli in. Stimulus isn't the word. Stimuli. And if your volume isn't equated, it's impossible to make judgments on things like muscle hypertrophy because that's the predominant, what's the word I'm looking for? Not outcome variable, dependent variable regarding muscle hypertrophy and to a lesser extent muscular strength as well. But that's why it's very, very important to take into account the confounding variables that the authors are taking into account and to make a note of what they're taking into account. And that's why those findings would make sense. That if the volume was the same in the morning versus the evening, we'd see pretty much the same response, very similar response. And if the load that they used, for example, and the frequency was very similar, we would expect similar strength gains also. So that would lead us actually onto the point, if we stopped at point one, we say that it's always best to train in the evening, but maybe not so. Maybe not so, and maybe there's more to the story. Maybe there's more to the story. And that's going to lead us into our second study of the day, which is a randomized control trial published all the way back in 2009 by Sedliak and colleagues. I hope I've pronounced that well as well. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. You'll find that reading research papers, guys, you come across a wide variety of names that you'll very much so probably struggle to pronounce. So this is a randomized control trial. 24 male participants. There was 2 experimental conditions and 1 control. The 2 experimental conditions was morning training, which the 9 participants were randomized to that group. There were 7 randomized to the afternoon training, and then there was 8 in the control condition. The total duration of the study was 20 weeks. They had a 10-week preparatory training phase. Okay, so there was all training groups, so that's the morning and the evening, completed training that was supervised in the time window of 5 p.m. or 1700 to 1900, 7 p.m. During this phase, the frequency of training was 2 times per week, okay? From what I can remember, I think I forgot to make a note of it in the actual notes that I've made here. As far as I can remember, the training volume was equated. Okay, so frequency was equated and training volume was equated from what I can remember. I do apologize. Weeks 11 to 15, then the program changed slightly. They introduced time of day specific training, okay? The morning group completed their sessions 0700 to 0900 in the morning, so 7 till 9 in the morning. The afternoon guys maintained this 1700 to 1900 range, this 1700 to 1900 time frame. The training frequency was also increased in both groups from 2 sessions per week, which would be 4 sessions over 2 weeks, to 5 sessions over 2 weeks. So for this period, they completed on average 1 more session every 2 weeks. So a little bit of progressive overload there. Weeks 16 to 20 then, the time of day specific training continued, but they did further increase the training frequency to 3 sessions per week. Okay, so that's how the progression was quite linear in that way. Training program primarily focused on the knee extensors, so this is where all their measurements came from as well. They were, they were measuring changes, for example, in the quadriceps femoris volume and cross-sectional area of the quads, so that was where their primary measurements came from. As a result, their training included a lot of the half squats, for example, loaded squat jumps, leg presses, weighted knee extensions. The training was also split relatively evenly as well, and this would have been the case across both training arms. 40% of it was spent in typical hypertrophy stimulating training, about 70%, 1 rep max, a little bit of higher volume, whereas the other 60% was split between high load strength training. That can be anywhere from like 80 to 100% 1 rep max, sets of like 1 to 8, and then also high speed training, and that was 38% to 22% respectively. So they had a wide range of training stimuli across this 20-week time frame. Okay, and 20 weeks, a decent duration for the study. Decent study time. You're taking people away to do these workouts from spending time with their family and all the rest of it. Let's have a look at the results. So when we're looking at this graph, for example, I'll obviously flash it up somewhere. This is the results, the relative change in the percentage of quadriceps femoris volume. As you can see, the control condition didn't change, as we would expect. Okay, that's the idea with a control condition. Okay, then you got the morning training variable, and it did increase significantly. Okay, it increased significantly versus the control. So the control is somewhere down here in the range of like 0.2 or 0.3%. And this morning training, for example, is all the way up nearly at 3%. So that's like nearly a 3-fold increase. Absolutely mad. I think it's actually more than 3-fold. It might be more than 3-fold. I might be getting my vocabulary mixed up there. But either way, it's order of magnitude. It's orders of magnitude above, okay? And in the afternoon training, even further above again, getting up towards like 4%, nearly. However, these changes between the groups were not significant, okay? They were all significantly above the control, which is what we would expect. But the difference between the morning and afternoon conditions was only 0.8%, and it was not statistically significant, okay? It's can't necessarily say that one was better than the other based on these measurements. For example, all of them were significantly different from control, however, indicating that obviously training, regardless of whether it's morning or afternoon, is going to be more beneficial than not training at all. That's going to be a key theme. Keep that in mind. And then we're onto this table, for example. So this now is the change in cross-sectional areas. That's what the delta means. That little triangle symbol is the change in, okay? And this is just all different areas of cross-sectional area that were taken, going from the most distal point of the muscle to the most proximal point of the muscle. What that means is it's getting closer back to the center of the body, basically. If you look at your forearm, for example, the most distal point of your forearm is going to be towards the wrist, and the most proximal point is going to be where it inserts at the elbow here, because that's your forearm. Your upper arm, same thing. Your distal point of your quadriceps, then, for example, is going to be the point down towards the knee. And then the most proximal point is going to be where it inserts back up to your hip. So that's how they're measuring this, okay? Cross-sectional area 1, for example, is the change all the way down towards the knee. And then they gradually, in even strips, coming all the way back up until they cover basically the entire cross-sectional area of the muscle. It's just segmenting the muscle and, getting accurate data points for all of these small little strips as you go up the muscle. And then that gives you the all cross-sectional area mean at the bottom. So it's just a good way of making sure that you keep everything accurate, and it's a good way of making sure that you're taking into account all of the different little fluctuations, the different muscle architecture that goes all the way up the muscle, okay? So, as you can see here, you have morning, you have afternoon, you have the mean, which is you have the control, sorry. And all of these are mean averages. And as you can see, all of them are like significantly different from the control condition. However, if you look at the symbols down the bottom, for example, where it says significantly larger cross-sectional area as compared with control group at p equals p less than 0.05, p less than 0.01, and p less than 0.001. Those are just all different alpha levels based on how much difference there was between the two versus the control. However, there was no significant differences between morning and afternoon, at least not statistically significant ones. Okay, so that's important to keep in mind. As you can see there, it's the 0.8 percentage change in quadriceps femoris cross-sectional area. All of them massively different over the 0.2 of the control, but not significantly different between the other. And then this is for the practical application section at the bottom. This is quoting the study here. And I think this was a useful takeaway that I think will sum up this study quite nicely. Strength training in the morning and afternoon hours is similarly effective when aiming for muscle hypertrophy over a shorter period of time, about 2 to 3 months. However, it remains unclear whether time of day specific training performed over longer periods of time, greater than 3 months, would cause systematic differences in the gain of muscle mass. Maximum strength gains also appear to be similar whether training is performed repeatedly in the morning or afternoon hours. However, there is some evidence that training repeatedly at a particular time of day may be beneficial when daily peak of maximum strength needs to be achieved at that time of day, especially in the morning hours. Strength and power athletes required to compete at a certain time of day, e.g. morning qualifications, may be advised to train repeatedly at that particular time of day for several weeks before the competition. End quote. Now that's going to be a very, very important theme, a very, very important point going into this last one, which is a literature review. And this was back in 2012 by Chtourou, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and Souissi. I am very sorry. I am very, very sorry. There's a lot of not good names for me to say in this episode. But anyway, it's a nice little literature review, which I think will highlight a lot of what we talked about before, add a little bit of extra context in. Again, you can go read the full text down below. We're not going to be dissecting this text in this episode because it is absolutely massive. We're going to be looking at a little bit of the conclusion section, which I think was very, very important to go over, and going back from there into the resistance training section and explaining a little bit about other things that may be influencing these changes, these slight changes in morning versus evening performance, for example. So the one thing they do highlight in this literature review, for example, is that time of day is a key factor that must be taken into account by athletes and coaches. The results regarding aerobic performance, so this is looking at performance as a whole, aerobic, anaerobic, power, resistance training, all stuff like that. They're quite conflicting when it comes to aerobic. However, regarding anaerobic performance, there appears to be clearly observed morning nadirs, so dips down in performance in the morning, and then afternoon to evening performance peaks. Okay. Suggested causal link between the circadian rhythm of sports performances and the rhythm of core body temperature, though diurnal fluctuations are also able to be influenced by regularly training at a particular time of day. Again, keep that thought in mind. There's one study that they reference, for example, that failed to show any time of day effects specifically or specific adaptations in this study. However, it was conducted in Guadeloupe in the French West Indies. Okay, it has a warm, which during the study had a mean temperature of about 27.7, sometimes above just 28 degrees, and also a moderately humid with an average humidity of about 65.4%. Okay, sometimes as high as getting up towards 80%. Okay, it's a plus or minus 12 depending on obviously what, just how it was that day. Okay, you had a range of one standard deviation of plus or minus 12% just in the natural environment. And this meant that the passive warm-up effect of this environment could have blunted the passive warm-up effect of the time of day. It would make sense that way if the causal relationship regarding temperature is correct. Okay, obviously, a warmer environment is going to increase your core temperature more than a colder environment, and obviously then that's going to blunt the effect of the passive warm-up increase of time of day. So because your core temperature is already elevated. Another point they made, training in the morning therefore, can potentially improve typically poor morning performances to the same level or even higher than their regular peak in the afternoon or the evening, and B, decrease the amplitude of the diurnal rhythm. At the point of this study being conducted, or at the time of this literature review being conducted, mechanistically, it was unclear as to why these changes occur. They didn't seem to be able to attribute it to modifications in the neuroendocrine system, such as via hormonal changes. But there may be more research coming out in the future, or research that I'm not aware of that will explain that. If you're aware of anything, please do let me know down below. Regarding resistance training in particular, and I think this is a particularly important point, obviously a lot of this centers around resistance training, which is what, as my role as a personal trainer, is what most people are interested in. Okay, building strength and building a bit of muscle, typically for aesthetic purposes. Little had been done at the time to assess the impact of days of training up to the point of the review, or time of day of training, sorry, up to the point of the review. Predominant assumption being that adaptations to resistance training may differ due to time of day, and that may be due to performance limiting factors being highest at certain times of day, okay? However, there is a common theme, and you may have already picked up on it. I've asked you to keep it in mind through this episode. The common theme that's repeatedly shown up in the literature, however, is that regardless of the time of day training is conducted, the subsequent performance is scheduled at the same times as those training sessions was significantly improved versus other times, okay? As I said, I was going to say, basically, if you train regularly in the morning, you'll have improved morning performance, and also so with evening and afternoon training. That's an important point. However, training in the morning seems to have beneficial effects not only in the morning, but also later on into afternoon performances. However, evening training alone does not seem to confer the benefits from evening training to morning performance. Okay, that's an important distinction. That was something that was quite surprising. So, regarding resistance training in particular, from this literature review, which I think sums it up quite nicely. In summary, and for practical consideration, if the time of competition is known, training sessions before a major competition must be conducted at the same time of day at which one's critical performance is programmed. However, if the time of competition is not known, resistance training sessions should be programmed in the morning to improve short-term maximal performances and counteract the effect of time of day, i.e. the morning nadir of performances. However, all of these studies have not investigated changes in performance during the course of day in high-level athletes. This is important because the amplitude of diurnal rhythm is higher in active compared with inactive subjects, okay? The main thing you can take away from that one, though, is that the vast majority of people are not high-level athletes, okay? Maybe some of you are. Maybe some of you can obviously navigate this with your coaches, okay? But for most people, this is also an important consideration. And that basically the answer to the question, based on what we've got here, and obviously there's more that could be said on this. This by no means a massive, definitive, one is better than the other. But it does highlight a very important point. And that is that the main important thing is just consistency. The main important thing is consistency with getting your ass to the gym on a regular basis. If you really are concerned with your performance, for example, the main key theme which you're going to take away from this is that times you do it regularly, you're going to improve your performance at those times. So you should try and keep to those times as best as possible. If you're a devout morning trainer, you're up at 4:30, you're in the gym at 5. If you stay with that, you will improve your performance at that time and you will progress inevitably. Same thing if you go to the gym in the evening, you're a devout 7 p.m. in the gym guy, maybe, or say you finish work at 5:30 or 5 o'clock, you go to the gym on your way home. That's your stress relief. You get out all the rest of the things so you can go home happy. Whatever it is, as long as you keep turning up at that time, you will improve. You will improve. It doesn't mean every session is going to be up and up and up on the last. You're going to have up and down sessions as everybody does. But you will improve, and you probably improve more than, for example, if you have to get your schedule changed all the time and you're going from training in the evening one day to training in the morning the next, and you got to take into account if you haven't been able to sleep the best because you didn't finish in the gym till late, and then you're trying to get to the gym early in the morning, your sleep's been affected, your stress levels are high, things like cortisol, so a catabolic hormone and stuff like that is a lot higher, you're under recovered, and you're trying to still push it, then you can start leading the way into potentially negative performance outcomes, or at least suboptimal performance outcomes, okay? But even then, consistency with getting to the gym trumps all. Consistency with getting to the gym trumps all. Yes, you need to obviously take care of your recovery, things like that, but consistency with just getting to the gym trumps all. After that, trying to go at specific times, because going to the gym at specific times is going to help regulate other aspects of your life as well. If you go to the gym in the morning, and you get your circadian rhythm upregulated in the morning, and then you go to work, you go about doing all the rest of your things for the day, and then by the time you get to the end of your day, your circadian rhythm's already back on the downswing. You're getting ready for, it's bringing you back down, getting ready for things like sleep, and obviously that's integral to your recovery. And keeping to that schedule, keeping to that specific time where you train in the morning as best you can is going to help you keep that mechanism in check, and that's going to have massive implications just for keeping you healthy as a whole, healthy, happy as a whole. So oftentimes, for example, we feel the worst when we don't feel in control of things. That's when we feel really bad, when we don't feel in control of things. And that's what having your routine constantly shifted about sometimes does to you. Obviously, sometimes it's inevitable and it's completely out of your hands. You can't always have, or sometimes you don't always have 100% control over things. But trying to keep control of this as best you can is going to be integral for making sure that you stay and feel in control of things. And that's going to help bolster that feeling of competence and autonomy and all the rest of things. So, and that's going to help you, just with your general quality of life, but also stay motivated to stay in the gym and continue making your performance improvements. So, as for the question, guys, does time of day affect the outcomes of strength training or training in general? Yes, it very much so appears that it does, but in the way that you want to get into the gym consistently, but also at as consistent and regular times as possible. So if you're in the gym 7 a.m. on the dot, and you can do that every single day, that will become, easier and more attainable over time. Similar to how if you are in the gym at 5 o'clock every evening, or if you have an extended lunch break, for example, and you go at 12 p.m. every single day, that's gonna depends on what your schedule's like as well. Depends on what your overall life balance is like. But trying to keep your frequency as consistent as possible, and then trying to keep your timings as consistent as possible, just to help you keep that routine in your life. And having that routine, having that set in place is going to help you feel in control of your life, because you are setting the tasks, and you're the playmaker of that, so to speak, and being in control is going to help you feel less helpless, which is what happens when we don't feel in control and we feel that life is running away with us. So yeah, try and keep your training at as consistent times as possible, guys. That's my best advice for it. Try not to, have too openly staggered training times. It's a bit like your sleep. Training in this way is a bit like your sleep. You don't want your falling asleep and wake times to be constantly changing. That's a repetition, or that's a recipe for very, very poor sleep, which is going to have a massive negative effects on your life as a whole, especially your training. So this way everything sort of comes together, and it has to work together in order to make you truly successful, in order to get optimal performance and optimal outcomes out of it, and the outcomes you really want. Who wants suboptimal outcomes, right? So as far as that goes, guys, like your sleep, like you want to be falling asleep or going to bed at pretty much the same time every night within a small window, and waking up the same time every morning within a small window. That's the number one thing for sleep hygiene, is putting yourself in a position where you fall asleep at the same time and awake at the same time to regulate your circadian rhythm. Similar things with your training. If you want to regulate your circadian rhythm, you regulate your sleep and set yourself up to succeed sleep-wise as best as possible. If you want to set yourself up to succeed with regards to your training, one of the things that you can do is making sure you're training at the same time every single time. And especially if you've got a key performance coming up where you know you're going to be training or you know you're going to be performing at a certain time, that last point from that literature review was very, very important. If the time of competition is known, training sessions before a major competition must be conducted at the time of day at which one's critical performance is programmed. Okay? So take that into account as well. That's the one that you take into account if you do have critical performances, if you're preparing for an event or something like that. For example, if you have morning, if you have afternoon, or if you have some events, you know, you have late on into the evening, for example. So yeah, take that into account, guys. I hope you found that very, very useful. Have an amazing day, morning, evening, afternoon, night, whenever it is that you're training. And I will catch up with you. And it's been a bit of a haphazard episode. I will catch up with you very, very soon. And maybe we can come back to this in the future as well if there's any more research that comes out, or if there's anything else interesting that I find when I'm going through my research that I feel that I need to add to it. I'm sure there will be. And maybe when we get into interviews sometime later in this podcast series, when it picks up a little bit, then maybe we can have some other people on that can add their perspective into it as well. We shall see. Anyway, have a great day, guys. I will catch up with you very, very soon. Godspeed.